So Victorians are enjoying some reinstated freedoms today, and people in other states and territories will get some reprieve from coronavirus restrictions over the coming week. But the virus is still present in the general community and being passed from person to person, so the warnings are still very much in place to be vigilant. And we've had this sad news this morning. There's been another death from the Ruby Princess cruise ship. So here are today's key developments in our coronavirus coverage. The relaxation of some restrictions has begun in Victoria for activities like small dinner parties and day hikes. New South Wales will ease some rules on Friday. In the Northern Territory, the Parks and Wildlife Department is warning it'll have to reconsider opening popular waterfalls if visitor behaviour doesn't improve in terms of acknowledging those physical distancing rules. A position will be created in the Federal Health Department, a Deputy Chief Medical Officer dedicated to mental health. Experts fear the economic damage caused by the lockdown could see a spike in suicides. America's top infectious diseases expert is warning of needless suffering and death as some states reopen their economies. Dr Anthony Fauci also says the number of virus deaths is most likely higher than the official toll. Authorities in the Chinese city of Wuhan plan to test all 11 million residents for COVID-19 by the end of next week in a massive push to expel the virus from the epicentre. New cases have been reported in China, including in Hubei province. And India will spend the equivalent of nearly 10% of the country's GDP on an economic relief package. Economists say unemployment reached nearly 25% this week. So we'll take a look at those elements in detail in a moment, but first to another story that some say is coronavirus related too. Australia is scrambling to head off a trade war with China after Beijing suspended imports from 4 abattoirs. The Trade Minister Simon Birmingham has requested a meeting with his Chinese counterpart to discuss the decision, but the dispute has sent tremors through the federal government, which is already staring at a massive budget deficit thanks to coronavirus. Here's political reporter Stephen Jedgetts from Parliament House in Canberra.
There's scepticism largely for two reasons. Namely, one, a lot is happening in this space at the moment, which makes officials here suspect that this is not a coincidence. And two, China has form. If you just look at what's happened in the last couple of weeks, of course, we had China's ambassador to Australia warning of a consumer boycott in China against Australian goods as a result of Australia's push for an international investigation into the coronavirus. And then only a few days ago, China's decision to potentially, put a massive tariff on Australian barley imports as well. Now, it's true that some of these disputes do date back a while. The barley one, for example, has been rumbling on for about 18 months, and it was probably always going to come to a head at some point. But nonetheless, the confluence of these events, the warning from the ambassador and then beef and barley in quick succession, that's been enough to convince at least some people in Canberra that this is not a coincidence, and we are seeing a subtle attempt at economic coercion. And that's particularly relevant when you look at what Beijing does in terms of its playbook. It quite often uses trade as a weapon, imposes technical measures to restrict trade as a retaliatory measure, all the while at the same time denying that it's doing so. Now, that means that the government is scrambling both at a political and at a regulatory level to try and head this off. The Trade Minister, Simon Birmingham, is in talks or is trying to get in touch with his Chinese counterpart to have a meeting to discuss the issue. They are looking for an off-ramp on this. They want to try and defuse this without inflaming the political tensions. But Simon Birmingham says when it comes to matters of the national interest, including Australia's push for an inquiry into COVID, the government will not be swayed and he will continue to hold the line. Let's take a listen to Senator Birmingham speaking earlier today on AM.
Well, there should be no cause for action in any of those areas. We will continue to defend the interests of our exporters. We've been very clear we're not about to change our policy positions under any threat, suggestion or otherwise of economic coercion. It's important that the Australian government stands up for Australian values, Australian interests. We protect our security, we protect the public health of Australians.
Simon in Birmingham speaking there this morning. And Stephen, through this coronavirus pandemic, there's been ongoing concern about the mental health ramifications about what's happened, particularly in relation to unemployment. And the government has been keeping an eye on that and has made a number of announcements. What's the latest on this?
Yes, that's right. Everyone has been really focused on containing the spread of coronavirus, of course, but now everyone's minds are really turning to the consequences of the enormous economic shock that has been dealt by the coronavirus. There have been some credible studies out there predicting that there is going to be a sharp rise in mental health problems and suicides as a result of that economic shock as people's livelihoods suffer. Today, the government's going to announce a new position, a Deputy Chief Medical Officer devoted specifically to coordinating the government's mental health response. And the Health Minister, Greg Hunt, told News Breakfast this morning that the government is now keenly focused on doing what it can to coordinate with the states to deal with this mental health pandemic.
So there has been very significant modelling done by the University of Sydney, and we take this very seriously. That's why we're trying to get ahead of the curve with mental health in just the same way that we have done with the virus.
And Stephen, what's the verdict on the Treasurer Josh Frydenberg's health after he coughed pretty vigorously through that economic statement to Parliament yesterday?
Yeah, vigorously might even be an understatement, Joe. It was a rather spectacular coughing fit on the floor of the lower house. And that did, of course, stoke speculation that the Treasurer was unwell. He took a test yesterday, he says, out of an abundance of caution to ensure that he is in fact well. Everyone was waiting keenly on that result. And this morning, the Treasurer tweeted with the good news that he is not unwell, that the test came back negative. Now, that's not a surprise, but it will nonetheless be a substantial relief both to the Treasurer and to the government as a whole.
Another passenger from the Ruby Princess cruise ship has died from coronavirus in New South Wales. The 81-year-old woman died yesterday, taking the Ruby Princess death toll to 22. 98 people have now died from COVID-19 in Australia. New South Wales Premier Gladys Berejiklian says of the 6 new cases in the state over the past 24 hours, 3 may have been transmitted within the community.
And this, again, states how vigilant all of us need to be, especially from Friday when restrictions are eased. And it's really, really important for all of us to take that extra precaution. As we know, there will be many more people out and about, and many more people out and about for recreation as opposed to other reasons. That is a big shift in the way in which we're managing the pandemic, a big shift in the way in which people can have that extra bit of freedom. Whilst we welcome that and are grateful that we're at this stage to be able to do that, those high rates of testing will ensure we can protect the community as much as possible and make sure we can also focus on those parts of the community where we really want to open up business and get those jobs going. We need to be in a position to do that, and therefore it's so important for all of us to come forward and get tested, even if we have the mildest symptoms. And I was very pleased to have brought to my attention a number of international reports which have said that New South Wales has the highest rate of testing in the world. It's something we're incredibly proud of, something we need to maintain. And I always say to our experts and my team here in New South Wales that there's no reason why we can't also lead the world in the way that we deal with the pandemic moving forward, in the way in which we give the good advice to our citizens, which keeps us all safe, but also look at parts of our community, parts of business in particular, that we can activate without having any adverse impacts on health. We know, though, that from Friday we'll be analysing the data very closely, because we appreciate once you ease any restriction, there's more activity, there's more chance of people getting the virus or passing it on to others. And we also know, given how good the return of schools has been to date, I know it's only day 3, but the feedback we've had so far has been very positive, and we anticipate that after next week there is a strong chance that the vast majority of students will be back to face-to-face full-time learning. But that is something the Education Minister and I will update everybody on next week.
New South Wales Premier Gladys Berejiklian speaking there a little earlier this morning with the news of 6 new cases in New South Wales over the past 24 hours after that figure of 0 from yesterday. Let's get the latest now on the situation in Victoria. Reporter Steph Ferrier joins us from Melbourne. Steph, so what have the officials reported there just in the last hour or so?
Yes, well, we've just recently heard from the state government and they have announced that there have been 7 new cases detected in Victoria in the past 24 hours, although 2 of those cases have been reclassified to other states and come off Victoria's tally, which means that the net increase here is only 5. Now, we heard from the Minister of Sport and Tourism, Martin Pakula, who says that none of those new cases relate to the Cedar Meats outbreak. However, 3 previous cases that were under investigation have now been connected with that cluster, and that now brings that cluster at the abattoir in Melbourne's west up to 88 people infected. Now, we also heard that there were now 110 active cases across Victoria, including 9 people who are still in hospital and 6 of those in intensive care.
And Steph, from this morning, Victorians have been able to enjoy a few things that they haven't been able to for a month or 2 now. What's been freed up?
Yes, well, as the clock struck 12, there was a brand new morning for Victorians here with some newfound freedoms. They will continue until the end of the month, and hopefully a testing blitz with another 150,000 tests that are going to be conducted might allow the health authorities to ease those restrictions even further at the start of June. But as of today, 5 people or up to 5 people will be allowed to visit your home in Victoria. Now, the Premier says that that doesn't mean that it should be seen as an invitation for people to host a dinner party every night of the week, but it's just to reconnect with close family members and friends again, although social distancing requirements will still be enforced, so perhaps don't go in for that hug. But there'll be a lot more love in the air as a result of weddings being allowed to have up to 10 guests now. There'll also be new mothers groups starting up again, as well as other important community reasons like Alcoholics Anonymous, with people up to 10 allowed there. And real estate auctions and inspections will also be allowed back again with up to 10 people as well. Now, that same number will also be allowed for a bit of sport and recreation, so that increases the limit that's currently been previous to this, just 2 people out apart from your own household. So that means that golf, for example, which was a big bone of contention here in Victoria, is back on the cards. So too is hiking, with Parks Victoria announcing that a lot of their national parks are now open again for business, and so you can go for a day hike, but you just can't camp as yet. There's also boot camps and exercise camps if that sort of stuff gets you excited, or maybe a kick of the footy, although there's no sign yet of any of the local or amateur footy competitions or sporting competitions starting anytime soon. Now, the other one that's going to be back in again is fishing, and we spoke early this morning or overnight with a couple of very keen fishermen who were out at St Kilda Pier braving a very cold and wet Melbourne night just to ring in these new changes.
We've got 1 minute left till we start. We've been braving this weather, and we've been kicking back at home for 7 weeks. So now, me and my mate here, Stan, we're gonna get soaked, but we're gonna hopefully catch a fish. 7 weeks of sitting at home. Hopefully this is gonna, anything, any kind of fish. I'm happy to be here. Beautiful weather. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Here we go! Woo!
So some real celebrations there at St Kilda Pier in
Catch
the wee
anything.
hours, and let's hope that they got a big one.
Okay. And Steph, what's the Tourism Minister had to say this morning?
Yes, well, Martin Pakula has also announced a $150 million relief package for the state's tourism, sporting and cultural organisations. He says that it's really important to help tide them over because a lot of these facilities and organisations still aren't able to operate at the moment. That includes some $40 million for grassroots sporting groups and organisations, as well as $32 million for cultural groups and another $44 million for the racing industry. But let's hear what he had to say about why it was so important to invest in these particular organisations.
We are determined to ensure that in our experience economy, in our visitor economy, in our sporting community, we're able to keep the door open and ensure that those clubs and those institutions which Victorians love are here on the other side of COVID-19 and are able to benefit from the recovery which will inevitably come. But we have to make sure we get them through this stage of the pandemic.
And this is in addition to a $17 million relief package that was already announced for the creative industries. So Victoria definitely trying to keep a lot of these organisations and industries afloat, Joe.
OK, Steph, we'll let you go and throw a line in down at St Kilda Pier. Join your mates down there and hang out there for a while, although the weather still looks pretty miserable. Thanks a lot, Steph Ferry there in Melbourne. Now, the leading expert on infectious diseases in the US and a key member of the White House Coronavirus Task Force has warned that lifting restrictions too soon could lead to further spikes in cases. His message is at odds with that of the President Donald Trump, who's keen to get the economy going again.
Washington continues to look like a scene from some dystopian drama. This, the still surreal sight of senators donning face masks for a hearing on COVID-19. One senior Democrat resembling a bandit from the Wild West.
Or cities or regions.
The key voice was America's top pandemic official, Anthony Fauci, who strongly warned about the dangers of reopening too quickly, a message for the country, a message for his boss, Donald Trump.
If that occurs, there is a real risk that you will trigger an outbreak that you may not be able to control, which in fact, paradoxically, will set you back, not only leading to some suffering and death that could be avoided, but could even set you back on the road to trying to get economic recovery.
We don't want your shutdown anymore.
The pandemic has demonstrated the polarization of America. This a Liberty rally in Boston, Massachusetts, a Tea Party-style protest demanding the immediate reopening of the economy. Donald Trump continues to hold press conferences where he often lavishes himself with praise, this time boasting about American testing. But though the reporters are masked, they're impossible to muzzle. This a Chinese-American correspondent from the US network CBS.
Why is this a global competition to you if every day Americans are still losing their lives and we're still seeing more cases every day?
Well, they're losing their lives everywhere in the world. And maybe that's a question you should ask China.
Sir, why are you saying that to me specifically?
I'm telling you, I'm not saying it specifically to anybody. I'm saying it to anybody that would ask a nasty question like that.
That's not a nasty question.
Please go ahead. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Thank you very much.
But he left without taking any more questions. An abrupt exit from a president looking for a quick escape from this crisis.